Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Mr. Saucedo's YouTube videos. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about consumers and specifically how to make a food chain. So the first thing that you need to be aware of are that there are connections between consumers. How do consumers affect each other? Well, consumers mostly affect each other by consuming other organisms, but this diagram is something that you're going to need to draw in your notes. So you have here the two big categories that everybody's pretty much aware of organisms. You've got herbivores and you've got carnivores. So you've got consumers that consume plant matter, and then you have consumers that consume animal matter. So the term for the one that consumes both plants and animals are omnivores. That's why it's written above. But most people don't realize that plant and animal eaters, or consumers, can be broken up into further categories. So some consumers only eat living plants. Those are called victivores. And then some only eat dead plants. Those are called lectivores. The other thing, if you're eating animals that are alive, you're called a bestivore. And then if you are consuming animals that have recently died, you're a carcassivore, okay? So you can probably picture some organisms. In fact, even if you have a pet snake, some snakes only eat living animals, like living mice. They won't even bother to eat a dead one already. That alone is an easy classification system you can use. Something else, though, are that we have two categories beneath here. And so you have detritivores and decomposers. They're kind of their own special case. They eat decomposed, or what's a good word to use? Decaying organic matter. So most of the time, carcassivores and lectivores, these are recently deceased plants or animals. Detritivores, they will eat rotten, decomposing, gross kind of stuff. And the difference between a detritivore and a decomposer are that decomposers return that nutritious stuff back into the soil when they're done. Okay, so herbivores almost exclusively eat plant matter. Notice the word almost. Herbivores occasionally will sometimes ingest meat, and that is okay. That still makes them herbivores. So again, victivores only eat living plant matter. So a good example of that would be this little caterpillar. Lectivores eat only dead plant matter. That would be like a termite. All right. Carnivores almost exclusively eat animal matter. You're probably aware that occasionally they'll eat grass or something else. Just because they eat a little bit of that does not make them omnivores all of a sudden. So almost exclusively eating animal matter makes you a carnivore. Bestivores eat only living animal matter. Lions are a good one for that. Carcassivores eat only dead animal matter. Vultures are a good example of that. All right, other terms. Omnivores eat both plants and animals, as you're aware. It doesn't have to be a 50-50 split, but it is not like, a single percentage point. It's not like, oh, well, they eat 1% plants, so that makes them an omnivore. No, that would probably still make them, either an herbivore or a carnivore, depending on what that 1% would be. So crows are a great example of that. Detritivores eat solid detritus. It's where we get the word detritivore from. So what is detritus? It is decaying organic matter. It could also be like, feces. So, actual excrement that like animals give out. But those are detritivores then. And so right there, you've got some really gross little moths that are feeding on a piece of poop. And then good examples of that: slugs, millipedes, sea stars, sea cucumbers. Those are all good detritivores. I gave you two examples on land and two examples in the ocean. Okay, decomposers. So they absorb detritus or detritus, again, depending on how you want to say it. And so when they absorb it, they're doing so via either chemical or biological means. So if it's biological, that's normally like a fungus, like a mushroom or something. Chemical, that could also be mushrooms, I guess, but normally that's like bacterial. And so eventually they return nutrients to the surrounding soil. So the waste that they give off is actually a nutrient for other organisms. And so mushrooms and bacteria are the two big categories of decomposers out there. And it's really important because decomposers are ignored in food webs and food chains because you'd have like every single thing going to them, but they're still there. So don't forget about decomposers. When you're making your food webs or food chains, it's okay to ignore them. But in reality, they're everywhere, and waste would pile up in the soil, and we would lose nutrients dramatically if decomposers didn't exist. So Consumers can also be either specialists, which means they only eat a certain type of food, or generalists, meaning they can eat many different types of foods. So specialists are, ones that you probably can pop up with at least a couple of examples of. The generalists are most living things. So humans, dogs, cats, they're generalists. They consume many different things. Specialists, like I said, you could probably come up with at least one or two of these. Pandas are a good example of a specialist. They eat bamboo. Koalas, they eat eucalyptus leaves. Anteaters, yeah, they eat a lot of different small insects. So maybe they're not necessarily considered a specialist a lot of the time, but they could be because they're only eating one particular type of food. There's a lazy panda. There's a nice little koala. Also lazy, I guess, but next. Okay, so this is where we're going to end for the day. So a food chain is how we can put all these different consumer relationships together into a nice straight line. So it is a simple feeding relationship that shows all the organisms in a straight line. Okay, now I don't have enough space to make it a straight line, so mine kind of curves, but you'll get the idea. So here is an example of a couple of organisms that you could put in a food chain. All right, so what's first? You could probably draw this in your notes too. So we've got some grass, we've got a grasshopper, we've got a quoll, a brown snake, and an Australian eagle. So what do we call the grass in this food chain? It is a primary producer because that is where the food chain starts. Next, we have a primary consumer. Primary consumers eat primary producers. Then we have a secondary consumer. That's what eats your primary consumer. Tertiary consumer, that's what eats your secondary consumer. And then a quaternary consumer, which eats your tertiary consumer. And yes, this can keep going. So you can have a quintary consumer and stuff, but we're pretty much going to stop at quaternary. Now notice the arrows. If you were drawing this, the arrows go from the primary producer all the way to the quaternary consumer. So the arrows are always going from the grass or from your primary producer the opposite direction. If you do it the opposite way and you were to flip all of these arrows and instead go that way, that would mean that your brown snake is consuming your Australian eagle, the quoll's eating the brown snake, the grasshopper is eating the quoll, and the grass is eating the grasshopper. And that's totally wrong. Last term, each level here, the primary producer, the primary consumer, secondary consumer, those are all called trophic levels. The word troph means to eat or to consume. And so every single one of these, this is a trophic level, this is a trophic level. Each one is separated. They're all their own trophic levels. All right? So hopefully that answers your questions. If you have any other ones, make sure you ask when we meet next.